Snow has a way of silencing the world. It's a literal off switch for the chaos of everyday life. When a heavy blanket falls, the birds go quiet, the traffic stops, and for a moment, you feel like the only person left on Earth. But in that silence, you start to notice things you'd usually miss. Things that shouldn't be there, shadows that move against the wind, and voices that carry further than they should. Tonight, we're looking at 3 stories where a winter wonderland turned into a waking nightmare. These aren't just ghost stories. They are accounts of moments where the natural world collided with something deeply, fundamentally wrong. Grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's head out into the cold. I've always loved the sound of falling snow. It's a rare phenomenon, almost like seeing a shooting star. It's one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself, but when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings, those small compulsions that defy logic. This happened during one of those perfect snowy nights. I live in an area that's woodsy, not quite deep forest, but close enough that a 5-minute drive puts you in the middle of nowhere. It was a Saturday. I remember because I was nursing a slight hangover from the night before, feeling that specific kind of winter lethargy. I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months, and the forecast had promised a clear, dry night. I was sitting in my room, lost in a book, when someone, or something, casually flipped a switch. The snow didn't drift. It arrived. I didn't even notice it at first until I glanced at the window and saw the world had turned white in minutes. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat. I knew exactly where I wanted to go, a local hiking trail that's usually deserted. The drive was eerie. The roads hadn't been plowed yet, and my tires made that satisfying crunch hiss sound. I parked at the trailhead, the only car in the lot, and stepped out. The silence was absolute. My only goal was to get deep enough into the woods to feel completely swallowed by the storm. About 20 minutes in, the adrenaline of the walk started to fade, replaced by a deep sense of peace. But the literal moment I stopped to appreciate the view, the silence was shattered. "Hi." It was a child's voice, high-pitched, clear, and impossibly close. It took me a few seconds to even process it. I told myself it was the wind or a branch creaking under the weight of the snow. Then I heard it again. "Up here, silly." I whipped my head around, scanning the dark trunks and the swirling white flakes. Nothing. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Then I looked up. There was a little boy, maybe 9 years old, sitting on a branch about 20 feet above the ground. He was bundled in a heavy parka, but his face... He was smiling this wide, fixed grin. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the expression of someone who had been told what a smile looks like but had never actually felt the emotion. Panic started to set in, but it was replaced by a confusing sense of logic. How did he get up there? The tree was a straight, thick pine. The lowest branch was 20 feet up. There were no ladders, no climbing gear, and, most chillingly, there were no footprints around the base of the tree. The snow on the ground was undisturbed. This meant he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes, since before the snow even started falling. "How did you get up there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's a secret," he whispered. His grin never wavered. I felt a paternal instinct fight with my sheer terror. I couldn't leave a kid in a tree in a blizzard. But before I could offer help, he stood up. He didn't climb down. He stood perfectly balanced on that thin, icy branch. "Watch this," he said. Without warning, he leaned back and let himself fall. I screamed. It was a 30-foot drop. I heard the thud, a heavy, wet sound as he hit the frozen earth. I ran toward the spot, expecting to find a broken body. But before I got within 5 feet, he snapped up. He didn't groan or limp. He just turned and bolted into the thicket, cackling. I don't know why I followed him. Logic tells you to run to the car, but I was in shock. I followed his tracks for a few yards, but the snow was getting thicker. Then, something slammed into my shoulder blades. I hit the ground face first. I felt small, cold hands latch onto my neck. He wasn't just hitting me, he was clawing. I could feel his fingernails digging into the skin of my throat. He was wailing, a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh. I managed to stand up, fueled by pure terror, and flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground, did a somersault, and disappeared into the trees, still laughing. I didn't wait. I wrapped my hat around my bleeding neck and ran. The drive home is a blur. The police later told me they found my footprints and the spot where I had fallen. But they found no other tracks. No child, no struggle. Just me, alone in the woods, bleeding from wounds they couldn't explain. This happened during winter break of my sophomore year of college. I was 19, and for the first time, I had the house to myself for 2 weeks while my parents were away. By the second week, a massive snowstorm, the kind they write news articles about, hit the town. By Saturday afternoon, the roads were gone. The plows were struggling to keep up, and the neighborhood felt like an island. My house is in a spread-out area, lots of trees between properties, which feels private in the summer but isolated in the dead of winter. By 6 p.m., I was losing my mind. The Wi-Fi had gone out, the power was flickering, and I was bored in a way only a 19-year-old can be. My only local friend, Ryan, lived about 1.5 miles away. In my head, I thought it would be hilarious to walk there through the blizzard and just show up on his porch like a frozen yeti. The first half-mile was peaceful. The streetlights created these amber halos in the falling snow, and the only sound was the rhythmic crunch-crunch of my boots. But then, I reached the Gap. It's a stretch of road with no houses, just empty lots and dense woods. That's when I saw the headlights. They were dim, swaying slightly as they approached from the opposite direction. It was a snowplow, moving at a crawl. I stepped off the road to give it room. As it got closer, it suddenly veered. There was no ice patch, no reason for it. It just turned hard right and plowed straight into a massive oak tree. The sound was a dull, metallic crunch. I waited for the driver to hop out, but the door stayed shut. The engine was still roaring, the yellow lights still flashing, casting strobing shadows against the trees. I ran over, shielding my eyes from the wind. "Hey, you okay?" I yelled. I reached the driver's side window and wiped away the frost. I expected to see a dazed worker. Instead, I saw an empty seat. The keys were in the ignition, turned to on. The heater was blasting, but there was no one there. I checked the passenger side. Empty. I even pulled the door open, thinking the driver might have slumped to the floorboards. Nothing. I stood there in the snow, the engine of the truck vibrating the ground beneath my feet, and a cold realization washed over me. I looked at the ground. The snow around the truck was fresh. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle, not a single one. Then a voice drifted from the woods behind me. "Help. Please, help me." It was a man's voice, sounding strained and distant. Every fiber of my being wanted to run into the trees and help him, but my gut, that primal instinct that keeps us alive, told me to stay back. I backed away from the truck, my eyes fixed on the tree line. "Help," the voice said again, but this time it was right behind my ear. I didn't look. I didn't wait. I bolted. I ran the remaining mile to Ryan's house, my lungs burning in the cold air. When I arrived, his dad called the police. 2 hours later, an officer arrived at the house. He looked at me with a mix of annoyance and confusion. He told me they had driven the entire stretch of road. There was no plow. There was no wreck. There weren't even tire tracks. He accused me of making the whole thing up to get a ride home. But I know what I heard. And I know that the engine of that non-existent truck was warm enough to melt the snow. My name is Sebastian, and 7 years ago I was a sophomore in high school. I went to a private school in the city, which meant a long commute on the train every day. It was a routine I actually enjoyed. It gave me time to transition from student mode to home mode. It was midwinter, and I had just finished a grueling track practice. By the time I reached the station, it was after 5:30 p.m. and pitch black. A blizzard had started while I was in the locker room, and it was escalating fast. The conductor announced that this would be the final train of the night. The tracks were freezing over. By the time I reached my stop, I was the only person left in the car. I stepped onto the platform, and the train pulled away, leaving me in a world of pure white. My station is isolated. To get home, I had to cross a highway and then take a shortcut through a thick patch of woods. The highway was empty. No cars, no plows, just a vast white ribbon of concrete. It felt like the end of the world. I entered the woods, the trees acting as a windbreak, making the air suddenly, unnervingly still. I was looking down at my feet, trying to follow the path when I saw them. Boots, not mine. I looked up. About 30 yards ahead, a man was standing in the middle of the trail. He wasn't dressed for a blizzard. He was wearing a thin, short-sleeved t-shirt and gym shorts. His skin was a terrifying shade of bluish purple, but it was his face that stopped my heart. He was staring at me with a wide, manic grin, his eyes bulging as if he were trying to see through me. He didn't look cold. He looked excited. I froze. "Hey, you okay?" I stammered. The man didn't answer. He just started to make a sound, a low, rhythmic clicking in the back of his throat. Then, in one fluid, terrifying motion, he dropped into a crouch and charged. He ran with a speed that shouldn't be possible in knee-deep snow. I turned and sprinted back toward the road, my track training being the only thing keeping me ahead of him. I could hear his breathing, heavy, ragged, and wet. I burst out of the woods and onto the main road. When I turned around, he was gone. There was no sign of him in the trees. I ran the rest of the way home, locked every door, and collapsed. When I told my parents, my dad grabbed a flashlight, but my mom held him back. We called the police, but they said they couldn't send a car until the morning because of the drifts. I tried to sleep, but the image of that blue skin and the clicking sound kept me awake. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at my bedroom window. My heart stopped. He was there. He was standing on a snowdrift high enough to reach my second-story window. His face was inches from the glass. Up close, I could see his beard was matted with ice, and his eyes were bloodshot. He wasn't clicking anymore. He was just watching me, his breath fogging the glass. I screamed for my dad. By the time he burst in with a baseball bat, the man was gone. The police eventually came the next day. They found his footprints leading from the woods to my window. They followed them back into the forest, but the tracks just stopped, right in the middle of a clearing. I never saw him again, but every time it snows, I check the locks on my windows, and I never, ever look at the tree line after dark. The snow is beautiful, but it's a mask. It covers the tracks of things that don't want to be found, and it provides a stage for the things that do. If you're out walking tonight and you hear a voice that shouldn't be there, or see a smile that looks a little too wide, don't stop to investigate, just keep walking. Thanks for listening. If you've had a winter encounter that you can't explain, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. Stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one.